Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. In today's episode, we're going to be doing a really simple cake called a Matcha Castella Cake. And this is sort of Japanese pound cake, but it is much more light and much more fluffy. And I really love the taste. And yes, there are versions of this cake that don't require the matcha, but I really love that the matcha gives it that sort of bitter taste, but at the same time a sweet taste. And if you're also wondering what matcha is, well, matcha is a high-grade powdered green tea that is often used for ceremonies, but as you can see, it's also used for desserts, and it is really bitter when you drink it straight up, but when it is in this cake, it just gives it the perfect flavor. And yeah, I really love making this cake because, well, I'm not the perfect cook. So when I try to cook desserts, I also try to make simple desserts, but desserts that are delicious. And yeah, maybe you're wondering, what are the ingredients that are needed in order to make this cake? Well, it's really simple. You only need 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1.5 tablespoons of matcha, 4 eggs, half a cup of sugar, 2 tablespoons of honey, and that's about it. As I said, it's super simple. It doesn't need a lot of ingredients. So let's get cracking on this recipe. First of all, we're going to take a metal mold which has the shape of the cake, but we can't really have the cake cooking in this mold as is, otherwise it's going to stick in the oven. So I like to take some parchment paper and then I'm going to make it into the shape of the mold. So let's get cutting. In order to cut the parchment paper properly, I recommend using the actual metal mold that you're going to bake the Matcha Castella Cake in. By doing it this way, you will be able to avoid using excess paper, but more importantly, it'll fit nicer inside the mold. Once the first template is cut, take another piece of parchment paper and cut it to the exact size of the first template. Now that the 2 pieces of parchment paper are cut, take one of the pieces and crumple it up. The reason that we're doing it this way is because the matcha cake is very delicate and it has to be baked at a low temperature. By placing one piece of crumpled paper directly on the mold and then placing another piece of parchment paper over the crumpled mold, you will avoid having the baked cake being in direct contact with the metal mold and therefore avoiding the risk of over baking it. Once that is done, add a bit of granulated sugar to the bottom of the pan in order to add a bit of sweetness to the final baked cake. Okay, now that we've put the 2 layers of parchment paper and the granulated sugar on the bottom of this mold, let's put it to the side. Don't worry, we'll come back to it later. And then we're going to take another container. It doesn't have to be too big, but enough to maybe be able to put in a couple of ingredients. And on top of this container, I like to put a metal strainer. And the reason for that is that the ingredients that are coming into this container have to be very separated. And this is kind of one of the secrets of this cake, is to have everything separated, unlike some of the other more American or European cakes. Yeah, it is really delicate. It takes a little bit more time, but it's really worth it. So the first thing we're going to put in this container is some all-purpose flour. Then afterwards, we're going to take some powdered matcha. And yes, this is kind of an expensive ingredient, but as I said, it really adds a lot of taste to it, so it's really worth it. And we're going to add 1.5 tablespoons of the matcha powder and mix it in with this all-purpose flour. In order to easily mix in the right amount of matcha, I like to use my trustworthy metal tablespoon. By doing it this way, I can ensure that I'm not putting in too much matcha. Next, take a small container and we're going to add 2 tablespoons of honey mixed in with around 1 tablespoon of lukewarm water. Then use a small spoon in order to mix in the honey and the water. The final consistency should feel similar to water. For the next part of the recipe, we're going to take another bowl and put 4 eggs in it. 3 eggs need to be whole and one of them is just going to be the egg yolk. I like to separate the egg yolk first and then I go on to the breaking of the other 3 eggs and put them inside the bowl. Whichever way you like to do it is fine, as long as we end up with 3 full eggs and 1 egg yolk. Once the eggs are inside the container, we're going to take a hand mixer, and this is where the fun part starts, or maybe the boring part starts, because we're going to have to mix it for quite a long time. But let's start the initial mix and then we'll get to how many minutes we actually need to mix it for. The initial mix is really simple and shouldn't take more than 30 seconds. Once that is done, take half a cup of sugar and add it to the bowl. Once we've added the sugar to the container, well, now comes the hardest part of the recipe, and it's taking the mixer once again and mixing all the ingredients in the container for 8 minutes. Yes, you heard me, 8 minutes. The reason that we're doing that is, once again, because we're trying to create a really fluffy and light cake. And in order to do that, well, it just takes time. So let's get blending. Mixing the ingredients with a blender for 8 minutes or even slightly more is really important. Castella cakes are known to be extremely light and with pockets of air in between the dough. This is what differentiates them from American pound cakes, and also the fact that they are less sweet than most American pastries. So yeah, it may feel like a long time to blend, but it really is worth it in the end. After 8 minutes of blending, add half of the honey mixture that we did earlier on, then mix for a few seconds. Finally, add the last part of the honey mixture and blend it for a few more seconds. Now that we've blended everything for a whole 8 minutes, yeah, that was a long time. Now we're ready to add the matcha and the flour, but this is also a delicate part of the recipe because we don't want to add everything all at once because we want to layer it in. So we want to mix this blend a third at a time. And in order to help us blend everything correctly, we're going to use a wooden spoon. And yeah, let's start blending. As mentioned, this is a delicate part of the recipe, so you want to add the blended mix a third at a time and slowly layer it in with a wooden spoon. Since we created so many air pockets in the mix, we want to be sure to maintain them by slowly mixing it in together. When the first third of the mix looks pretty mixed in, add another third and gently layer it a couple more times. When that is done, mix in the final third and repeat the process that was done for the other 2/3 of the mixture. Now that everything is gently mixed, well, we're going to take the regular blender one more time, and we're going to mix everything just slightly, not too long. The final mix should be super quick and really only takes about 30 seconds. We did mix for quite a while prior to adding the matcha batter, so it's practically already mixed in before the final blend. While pouring the batter into the metal mold, you may notice that it's kind of sticky and doesn't pour completely, leaving a lot of extra batter in the pot. Feel free to use a spoon in order to help get the batter into the metal mold. Once the batter is in the mold, tap it a couple of times on the counter in order to even it out, but also take away some of the air bubbles in the batter. Finally, in order to make the batter more homogeneous, take a toothpick or something similar and gently pass the stick through the mold in a zigzag. This will further remove any excess air bubbles. And yes, all of the ingredients are in the mold and we're finally ready to bake this cake. And this is also another difficult part because the baking takes about 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes. It really depends on your oven. It has to be cooked at a really low temperature because we don't want to burn anything right here. It is a delicate cake. But yeah, everything is pretty much done. So let's get going and preheat this oven. Before placing the cake in the oven, we will want to preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the oven has reached that temperature, the cake mold is ready to go into the oven. Leave it inside of the oven for 5 minutes and then you will want to spray a bit of water on top of the cake mix and then leave for another 5 minutes. At that point you can lower the oven temperature to 300 degrees Fahrenheit and then leave it in the oven for another 40 to 50 minutes. You can check to see if the cake is done by putting a knife in the batter. If it comes out clean, then the cake is fully baked. Now that the cake is fully baked, let it cool on the kitchen counter for about an hour and then you'll want to cover it with plastic wrap. This process is important because we want to keep the cake nice and moist before putting it in overnight in the fridge so that it can become a bit more firm. It's possible to eat it right away, but usually I find that putting it in the fridge hardens the cake enough to not break it when taking off the paper wrap and cutting slices. And here we go! The matcha cake is done. Doesn't it look beautiful? It's the same color as kryptonite, and yeah, I will say that this cake is my kryptonite. It takes away all my powers, but it's so darn delicious. And as you guys can tell, it's pretty simple to make. It's just a couple of ingredients, and yeah, there is the mixing and then leaving it in the oven for 45 minutes or more or less. But yeah, it does turn out really, really good, and it's super duper light. And yeah, that is it for the recipe. I really hope that you guys enjoyed coming on this little adventure making this matcha cake. And if you did enjoy it, please be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, let me know how your recipe came out. Let me know if there's other variations to it. Let me know if you didn't like it. Let me know if you liked it. And also maybe let me know if there's other future recipes you'd like me to do. Okay, well that's it. Have a great day and I'll see you guys in the next video.